Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden and welcome to The Other Side of History. In this talk, I would like to give you the history of the man Desiderius Erasmus. Now, he is a very important name in the Protestant Reformation, and maybe after this talk you will see why he is such an important name. So Erasmus was born in a small town in Holland called Rotterdam, and he was born in 1466. So Erasmus was actually older than Martin Luther. Remember that Luther was born in 1483. So Erasmus, he was the son of a priest. So a priest, you might be thinking, son of a priest? Yes, Erasmus was the son of a priest, and here's the story of Erasmus's parents. So Erasmus's father, his name was Gerard, and he fell in love with a physician's daughter, and her name was Margaret. But there was a problem, and it was that Gerard's parents and his 9 brothers, they kept on urging him to embrace a monastic life. So Gerard, he couldn't make up his mind if he should marry Margaret or if he should become a priest. So time went on and on and on, and passion actually overtook the couple. And Gerard, he felt that he must leave home just to clear his mind. He did not want to leave Margaret, but he also felt that he must go to Rome and become a priest. So when Gerard, he had left home there to clear his head, he didn't know that when he left the object of his affections, which was Margaret, that she was on the point of becoming a mother. The frail Margaret, she gave birth to a son, who is the subject of our talk, Desiderius Erasmus. So Gerard, he was not informed about the birth of his son. Instead, his parents actually told him that she whom he had loved had died. So Gerard, he was overwhelmed with grief, and he decided that he would enter the priesthood, and he would devote himself entirely to the service of God. So sometime later, Gerard, he returned to Holland, and he found that Margaret was not dead. In fact, she was very much alive, and he had a son. So Margaret, she would not marry another, and Gerard, he remained faithful to his sacerdotal vows. And so the parents' affection, it became concentrated on their son. Margaret had taken the tenderest care there of Desiderius, and his father, he felt that he must be sent to school. So Desiderius, he was only 4 years old when he began his studies. At an early age, his genius was recognized. Before he was 13, one of his teachers had said, "This child will attain the highest pinnacle of learning." And the teacher was actually not wrong. Desiderius Erasmus is a well-known name in history. At the age of 9, Erasmus, he became an orphan. His mother died first, and then not long after, his broken-hearted father followed her to the grave. Erasmus, he spent 6 years in an Augustinian monastery, and then in 1492, he was made a priest. Erasmus, he actually entertained the greatest dislike for a monastic life. It was his guardians who had urged him into this, embracing this life of a priest. He speaks of rising from a filthy bed, darkness, having to go out in the darkness and the frost to break the ice from the well, and then draw the stinky water, scarcely distinguishable from the pestilent sewers that flowed or stagnated nearby. And he also talked about coughing out of his throat the damp which had distilled on the moldy walls. And little by little, though, Erasmus, he fought his way out of the ignorance, the poverty, obscurity, and he found a place at the university there in Paris. Now, early on, Erasmus became conscious of his powers. In the study of the ancients, he acquired a correctness and an elegance of style that placed him far above the most eminent scholars there in Paris. He gained a great reputation among the learned. It is worth Googling, actually, a portrait of Erasmus. The portrait is one that Erasmus himself was very reluctant to sit for. In the portrait, you can see his bright and intelligent, but kind of melancholy, skeptical eyes. On his large, eloquent mouth is a finely cut curve that speaks of scholarly taste and an ironic smile, which plays about the upturned corners there of his lips. It has been said that Erasmus laid the egg which Luther hatched. In 1415, printing came into being. Erasmus, though not without much difficulty, he managed to restore the uncorrupted edition of the Apostles' Greek New Testament to Christendom. Now remember our history of Protestantism that we have just been talking about? Well, the roots of Protestantism, they go right back to the Apostles. It was the Church of the East that the early Greek church, who had a pure faith, and they also had uncorrupted leaders such as Lucian of Antioch. They also had the uncorrupted manuscripts of the Bible. Now, this Greek text is known as the received text. During the Dark Ages, the received text was practically unknown outside of the Greek church. It was finally restored to Christendom by the labors of this man, Erasmus. So while Calvin, he was learning to prattle the jargon of the people, and Tyndale was hanging about Oxford, uncertain as to what his future was, and Luther, he was yet still groping for light, Erasmus, he was collating manuscripts of the New Testament. He advocated its translation into all vernaculars, and he wrote annotations to explain its sense to the people. At this time, he had already spoken plainly to two of the popes about the necessity of reform, and he had published, in his own telling and popular style, an exposure of the Romish corruptions. Erasmus had to travel all over the place in order to recover the lost Greek manuscripts. He went to the most remote of libraries. He also searched out competent printers. Now remember that travel at this time was very wearisome, and at times it was even hazardous. Yet Erasmus was determined to accomplish his goal in restoring the received text, no matter what the cost. He said, if any Greek book comes to hand, I would rather pawn my coat than to not obtain it, especially if it be religious, such as a Psalter or a Gospel. Now, what is so amazing and beautiful about Erasmus's work is that he avoided all of the corrupted manuscripts, and he selected only those following the Greek text, the same text that was edited by Lucian there of Antioch, whom we talked about at the beginning of our history of Protestantism. Erasmus rejected the manuscripts of Origen, just as Lucian had. Furious monks loaded him with abuse from the pulpit and actually called him a second Lucian, a fox that had laid waste to the Lord's vineyard. The Apostle Paul had planted the gospel in the midst of the people who spoke the Greek language. The New Testament was written in Koine Greek, which was the common language of the day. Paul, he combined his writings with that of the other apostles to make our New Testament Bible. It took much time and labor for Erasmus to find these uncorrupted manuscripts in Greek and to restore them to Christendom. I believe that God led and helped him in this very important task. However, after he had finally gathered the manuscripts, his edition was completed within 10 months. Many of the reformers found their way to Christ through the reading of Erasmus's New Testament. Of course, Erasmus began to everywhere make friends and many enemies. He was always learning and always making startling use of his learning, until he stood the recognized first scholar of the world there at that time. As Martin Luther started to become known, some said that Erasmus had helped him. Erasmus replied to this. He said, "As to Luther, he is altogether unknown to me, and I have read nothing of his but 2 or 3 pages, not because I despise him, but because my own studies and occupations did not give me leisure. And yet, as I hear, there are persons who affirm that I helped him. If he hath written well, the praise belongs not to me. And if he hath written ill, I ought not to bear the blame, since in all his works there is not a line that came from me. His life and conversation are universally commended, and it is no small prejudice in his favor that his morals are unblameable, and that calumny itself cannot fasten no reproach upon him." So again, speaking of Luther, Erasmus, he said, "I have cursorily turned over some pages of his writings, and have recognized in him gifts well fitted to serve the cause of religion, if he employed his abilities to the glory of the Savior. As many atrocious crimes were charged upon him, and some of them manifest lies, I wish that if he were at fault in some things, he should be amended, not made away with." And actually Luther commented on this himself. He said, not like the hangman, and not given to the hangman, but to the theologians. That's what he appealed to. So Erasmus, he goes on to say, "If this be favoring Luther, I frankly own that I favor him. And so doth the Pope, and so do you all, if you be true divines, and indeed if you be true Christians." Later, Luther and Erasmus actually did clash, but it was because Luther was a man of resolution and courage, and Erasmus, he was a man of timid prudence. Now, we will discuss their differences and also their dialogue in another talk. Now, what thought that I would like to leave you with in this talk, however, is the important work that Erasmus did in restoring this true text of Scripture to our world. The manuscripts that Erasmus used are what was used to make our beloved King James Version Bible. Erasmus once said, "We kiss the old shoes and dirty handkerchiefs of the saints, and we neglect their books, which are the more holy and valuable relics. We lock up their shirts and clothes in jeweled cabinets, but as to their writings on which they spent so much pains, and which are still in existence for our benefit, we abandon them to moldiness and vermin." So Erasmus, he had a disgust for the theology of his time, which was the theology of scholasticism. Erasmus was not against the science of theology in itself, but the mode of teaching, it was what he was condemning. It was a mode of teaching which, in his own words, stripped this queen of sciences of all her beauty, and exhibited that theology which was once most venerable and full of majesty, now almost dumb, poor, and in rags. So those who drove Luther out of the church and listened to no remonstrance within it are actually the parties responsible, as well as for all the bloodshed and the misery and the revolution which followed the Reformation. They are also responsible for the ignorance and the superstition which in Catholic countries has become identified with Christianity. Erasmus was in error, but it was his mistaken view in thinking too well of human nature. He expected for long-established abuses to be removed by those whose interest it was to maintain them. Erasmus, he remained a Roman Catholic, hoping to bring about reforms within his beloved church. Now, we cannot call him a reformer, but he gave to Christendom the pure manuscripts of the Bible. He gave us the Protestant Bible. This Bible was the greatest reformer of the Protestant Reformation. Luther used the received text for his German, Old, and New Testament. Tyndale used the received text for his English translation of the New Testament. Then in 1611, 54 scholars used the received text to produce the King James Version of the Bible. Erasmus should be remembered as the one that God used to restore the pure text of the Bible, which became the very heart of the Protestant Reformation. If you have enjoyed this little talk, I would just like to encourage you to click on that like and subscribe button, leave your comments, and I just want to thank you for listening, and God bless.